Cardinals are heading home now after winning today in Houston. That solidified a road trip where they went 4-5. Not terrible. Maybe not the best that you would have hoped for. But you win the last game and you'll have a chance to feel good about the start of this next homestand, which will start tomorrow at Busch Stadium. So are you satisfied with the 4-5 road trip that the Cardinals just went on as they try to keep pace with everyone else in the National League? 875-KTGR if you want to give us a call or a text. I mean, they lost a little bit of ground from where they had been coming into last weekend, but, I mean, again, hope is not lost. I think that very well could have changed if either of their two wins go the other direction. We'd be talking very differently today. But
a lot more negative. Yeah. They'd still have hope on the calendar, but it would be a lot less of a feeling of, all right, I'll take it. I'll take 4-5. 3-6, people are panicking a little bit more.
It might be hard, though, to maybe put it up against the rest of the schedule here because, again, it was the end of the run that put them back to 500 and restoked the hope that they would have had for the beginning of the season. And now they get a little bit of a punch back from the two teams that they faced and have to try to make sure that isn't a knockout blow. And I don't think they had a knockout blow over the last.
No, and they won the Red Series, so the fact that they handled that is good.
Yeah, I mean, they had that series, and it was part of the run that got them to 500. And so now that they're just a little bit below, I'd say you're not. I don't know if satisfied is necessarily the right word, but maybe you're just okay. You can tolerate it. This is tolerable. I
would say tolerable is pretty good. I would not say I'm satisfied or content. I don't think Cardinals fans really are.
Yeah, I was close to content, but no.
Content is still too close to satisfied as we play the synonym game here on the Big Show at 5:13. I would say tolerable is pretty good. I'm kind of ambivalent on it. Like it's fine. It didn't ruin anything, but it does increase the pressure just a little bit more on finding the run where you're capable of doing so, and that's where it's got to come now. This next week is Rockies-Pirates. 4 has to be the absolute minimum, but really this would be the time to go ahead and take 5 of 7. Win both series, 3 of 4, and then 2 of 3. That's where I think the Cardinals really ought to be. You'd be content with 4 and 3. You'd be satisfied with 5 and 2. That's where that line can be drawn on this next stretch of a homestand. But the bottom didn't drop out, and they managed aggressively in the way that Ollie Marmol said, we're not going to lose this last game. We're not going to get swept by Houston. We'll use our best relievers. And they sort of had a similar experience against the Phillies on Sunday night where they were, they needed a clutch hit from Gorman in the 10th inning to make sure they plated that run from third, and he came up with the only wrist hit of that game on Sunday. So they've risen to the occasion to ensure that the bottom doesn't fall out of the season again. And that's good. Like, they've weathered the storm is what I would say. Because when you climb back up the way they did and finally get to 500 and do it over a 15-game stretch where you go 12-3, that's really good. I didn't know they had that in them after the 7-game losing streak to follow it up immediately with fixing the problem and it only taking 15 games to get back to 500. But then you can expect a counterpunch just when you schedule the way that it is, and the Phillies and the Astros are the teams you play. The Phillies are the best team in baseball, or if not, the Yankees are, and the Phillies are number 2. But the Astros are better than their record would indicate, and I think they're set up a little better right now than they were earlier in the year. Granted, they suffered some injuries to the position player group this series, but I think to be able to just get through that and weather the storm is what I would say. Now you have to say this is the function of how our schedule plays out. We weathered the tough part, but you can't then weather a 7-game stretch against the Rockies and Pirates. You have to go win that stretch and maybe do so kind of convincingly.
And you have so many home games for the rest of this month. Like, this is the month where you have to start moving. Like, it's the moving month for the Cardinals, for the type of team that they are right now, right around 500 at the 60-game mark and just trying to stay afloat. If you are wanting to give yourself a cushion for when you may, God forbid, of course, but you maybe have more injuries down the road that you have to figure out, and you have to come up with a plan for, a contingency plan to cover whoever might be out. I mean, this is the stretch where you can do damage against teams coming into your place, because you'll have a 6-game road trip after that, but then an even longer homestand to finish out the rest of the month. And so
it's actually a 7-game road trip, because that game that's a home game, but it's in Alabama. So they're going to have some grueling travel, because you're going to go Wrigley to Miami, and then you're swinging back up through Birmingham. Weird travel quirk, but it is just for one game to have to travel for only a game, and that's going to be an event at Rickwood Field in Birmingham. So it's going to take a lot out of the guys, and they get that off day on Friday as a result. But this is, and even again, like when you get to go play Miami, it is technically a road game, but that's a series you want to win.
Yeah, you
and
beat
then
that team.
Technically, you're hosting the Giants. And that's a team that's kind of in that same boat as you, hovering around 500. This is the month where you'd like to see the Cardinals at least win enough to where when they do inevitably drop another series or they get swept at some point, it doesn't bring them below 500. It's like you get swept to get back down to 500. It's kind of climbing that ladder ever so steadily, and the schedule sets up for them to be able to do that if they play their game.
Yeah, because right now, I mean, they're not in a terrible spot, but you're still working against the calendar a little bit, and if you tread water for the rest of the month, with all these home games that are on the schedule, like, it's not going to set you up well. You're going to be right back in this spot, and it'll be July. And then I suppose you'll still want to buy at that point. You'll still be buyers at the deadline if you're still around 500.
Just hovering.
But it's a tougher decision, right, at that point. So, I don't know. I think this was a good win for them to get today, because it doesn't kill hope for what could happen this week against the Rockies. You want to make sure that you lock down home field advantage throughout this next week.
Yeah, we know the things that are going to be key about this series in terms of the offense doing its job and the pitching, obviously, you hope can hold serve. But I want to see a more fundamentally sound Cardinal team than maybe what we saw over a good stretch of this road trip. Errors were commonplace. Today they were better, but last night there were errors on Nolan Gorman. He made 2 of them in that game. You had wild pitch by Palante. It just a lot of little things that were not being tidied up by the Cardinals last night, that even as the offense tried to mount a charge with some home runs in that game, after Palante had given up 6, the little things were going against them, and I think ended up being the difference. And I'll count this as fundamentals as well. I know it's now 2 games ago, but Brendan Donovan's at bat last night when they had the bases loaded, and he just stared down 2 fastballs right down the pipe. Was maybe the worst at bat that I've seen a Cardinal take all year, and maybe one of the worst at bats across MLB all year. So it's just one of those things where, like, you've got to minimize when you're in a position to strike and maybe steal a game like the Cardinals legitimately were last night. When you give up 6 runs from a starter in 3 innings, you pretty much figure you're cooked. But they weren't. They had the go-ahead run on first and the tying run on second with the bases loaded, and Donovan was caught guessing. I guess he thought off speed, and then he thought off speed again, and it was just 2 fastballs right down the middle that he certainly could have done something with if he had been in a better spot, just prep-wise for that AB and being up there ready to hit at whatever would come his way instead of maybe playing the guessing game. So just fundamental little things like that I think the Cardinals pride themselves upon not being on the wrong end of, but have been a little more recently in ways that you don't want to see. And you don't want that to become characteristic of this team. You want to be able to say, oh, that's an uncharacteristic mistake, and have it be true, and not just kind of, putting lipstick on a pig. I think a little bit this week we would say, oh, that usually don't see that, but then you look up and go, wow, Arenado is dead last in baseball in defensive runs saved. Like, they're going to need to try and play clean in this series and the one to follow against Pittsburgh. And if they do that on the homestand, I don't think they'll have much of a problem winning the homestand and maybe even getting 5 or 6 games to really cement themselves as a contender.
Yeah, I mean, that puts them above 500 if they are able to put that together, if my math is correct.
Yeah, I mean, if they go 5-2,
if they win 5,
they'll be a game up.
Yeah, so I mean, and then you're going into the Cubs series feeling a little better about that one in Chicago. So
that would be fun.
Fun series. I mean, you can set up a really good stretch here for regaining that confidence in what this season could be. But for right now, I mean, yes, you tolerate the road trip that they just had. You recognize that they were facing a tough team over the weekend in Philadelphia. They're facing a team that is tougher than their record says in the Astros earlier this week. Now, no excuses. I mean, it's time to do work, time to move up, time to put some results underneath the belt, and actually provide some comfort for those later months where you are going to be in the thick of the race. But give us your thoughts, Cardinal fans, 875 KTGR here on The Big Show.
And if John Mozeliak wants to be proactive, he can look at the market and say there's still a need for a right-handed reliever on this bullpen to juice up the back end of it. By back end, I don't mean the guys that are pitching 7, 8, and 9 every day, but the ones that can go when those guys can't. The guys that are lower on the totem pole. Find a righty reliever. You know what, though? I don't know what the Cardinals would have to give up when you look at the rumors of who the White Sox are maybe willing to listen on. Guys like Garrett Crochet, who's really young because he basically came right out of college and was a big leaguer right away. He's still only like 24, 25 years old. Been a good starter for them. Maybe Michael Kopech would be a good reliever. And it seems like Luis Roberts should become a Cardinal. So I don't know what you'd have to give up. It would be a massive package. You're talking Tink Hence. Maybe you are talking about like a Jordan Walker. I don't know. I don't think that's something that we're at the point of the Cardinals considering. But I think if you wanted to be real serious about trying to fix this roster on the fly and make 2024 special, the White Sox are a bad team, but they've got some players that the Cardinals could probably use. If those guys are being traded, there are other MLB teams with better farm systems to be able to outpace whatever the Cardinals could offer. But I don't know, just fun to think about the Cardinals zigging when they normally zag. Like, they're very predictable when they come up toward a deadline. They wait it out till the very end, and then they address with the kind of micro moves that can give them incremental gains. It would be fun to see them just nuke a trade deadline and go, you know what, Tink Hence is probably awesome. He's up to number 22, according to some prospect service that did its update. I think it was Baseball America Prospectus. I don't remember, but he's been doing really well for the Cardinals at Double-A, and maybe he's an answer in the big leagues, or maybe he's the next Cardinal pitching prospect to be hyped up, and then he gets here and it's a little bit of a disappointment, or maybe he's a reliever instead of a starter. Like, if you could make some moves, I don't even think he would necessarily be untouchable for me. I don't want him to trade him, but I also am just kind of in a malaise when it comes to this front office about the fact that they've just never really made in recent years that move that shocks people. It's like, oh, damn, they mean business. It would be kind of fun to see that to liven up this summer. Just me personally.
If it's for Luis Robert, then you would have to think that Jordan Walker has to be a part of it, right? I mean,
so Luis Robert, I don't know what his contract situation is still. He's only 26 years old, and he signed that big deal back, a number of years ago.
The start of his career, yeah.
Yeah, through 2025, yeah, because he was an international free agent that came over, and the Cardinals basically were in on him till the bitter end, but they wouldn't pay that little extra bit on what at the time was considered an unproven player, and that was the logic Bill DeWitt used when asked about it later, is that, well, he had never played, he was just unproven. Sometimes that's the smart money. And look, Luis Robert's not having a great season necessarily. Nope, yeah, he is. Never mind. I don't know what numbers I was looking at last night. I thought his OPS was in the low sevens. It's at 866. He's injured. That's what it must be. He must have not played very much. I'll figure out what's going on with this.
He just got reinstated.
That's what it is.
Yeah, so he has been hurt, but he is now back with the White Sox.
So I'm right. He did have a 719 OPS, but then he played a game, went 2 for 4 with a home run. So it went up from that to 866. But the caliber of player that he is, you look over the course of his career, an 828 OPS, he's under team control next year, and then you'd have to sign him. I don't know if it's crazy to say that you'd trade Jordan Walker in that. Because here's what it is. Your inclination is going to be, no, you obviously can't do that. But then what happens a year later when maybe he goes the way of Dylan Carlson, and you're like, well, he had more value than he has now. And he's still young enough. He's 22 to where I can't imagine that there would be teams that would say, oh, he's a bust. He had a great year last year for the Cardinals, and he's just kind of struggling a little bit this year. I wouldn't do it, Andy. I'm going to say officially I wouldn't do it, but it's not impossible that time marches on, and in 12 months we look back and go, oh man, based on the trajectory of the two guys, maybe they should have just said, let's make the bold decision. So I don't know. This is going to be something that we can debate as time goes along.
For quite a while.
It's probably a hot take. I said I wouldn't do it, just for the record, but
if it's enough for the White Sox to say, all right, well, this package can make sense for us if Jordan Walker is part of it, then I think I would maybe want to do it if I'm the Cardinals.
I would need Robert, and I would also need Garrett Crochet and probably Michael Kopech or another reliever.
Woo.
And I would be sending a package as well. I'm sending a Tink Hence as well. I'm sending, it's going to be a blockbuster. Otherwise, I just have to know I'm getting enough to really give myself a chance in 2024 and 2025 to blow up the future that way. The Cardinals don't operate like that. It will never happen. And I'm on the side of the fence of I wouldn't do it. But just for the record, it's fun to think about.
Cardinals found a way to avoid another sweep. It was a solid game today. I mean, all around. I mean, both teams had lineups that maybe weren't their best. Mason Wynn sat again today, just making sure he's resting throughout this time. There aren't too many off days going forward for the rest of this month. So Cardinals will have to pick their spots with a lot of their stars, especially the ones like Wynn, who you want to make sure holds up for as long of this season as possible with his back issues. And so he gets the rest today. But, I mean, the offense did what it needed to do. Alec Burleson drove in another run. Brendan Donovan was at the top of the lineup and did his thing. And, of course, Nolan Arenado with all that. But maybe the thing that caught everyone's eye was the fact that Miles Michaelis was pitching very well. 62 pitches through 6 innings. That's pretty darn good. That's efficiency. That's maybe lending toward going long into a game, pitching into the 7th. Heck, maybe even the 8th. But then Ollie Marmol takes him out and goes with JoJo Romero in the 7th. Interesting to kind of go back and look and see whether that was the right decision. I mean, they won the game, so, I mean, hindsight, you're thinking, absolutely. Ollie Marmol was asked about it after the game. Here's what he said.
Yeah, we got 3 guys that are really good on the back end. He's going right through the lane. At that point, it's not pitch count. It's more familiarity with the hitters that got him. And the guys that were coming up had 2 homers against him. That's JoJo's lane there with 2 lefties coming up. They don't have a righty off the bench today unless they wanted to get Bregman going again. So those guys won in order.
You like that? You like that reasoning?
Managerial masterclass. Yeah, he did exactly what he should have done.
Wow, okay.
I mean, I don't understand. I think people just like to find things to pick on. The guy went 6 innings, gave you another quality start. We can credit Miles Michaelis for having done that. 5 of his last 7 have been quality starts, which is at least 6 innings and 3 earned runs or fewer. Today it was 2 earned runs. They came on back-to-back solo shots, and the batters that hit him were due up in that 7th inning. And JoJo Romero did his job. Andrew Kittredge did his job. Ryan Helsley looked really good, and the fastball looked good again, too, for Helsley, which I think is a key. He threw a couple of fastballs at the top of the zone to Singleton at 100 miles per hour, and then I was sitting there with my son, and I said, I think he's about to go curveball low and away here because Singleton's just not going to have a prayer after fouling off that 100 mile per hour at the top of the zone. And sure enough, curveball snapped one off really good from Helsley. No, I think you had the bullpen setup that you want, and you've got that 2-run lead, and the Cardinals have the luxury, even though there have been some bumps in the road for the triumvirate, the 3 relievers that you trust, 7, 8, 9, I still think they have the luxury of those 3 being one of the best trios in baseball in terms of locking down the back ends of games. And Miles Michaelis has a tendency to wear down and maybe make a mistake with the slider or make a mistake with the curveball. Opponents are just absolutely crushing his slider and his curveball this year when they make contact with those pitches. And we saw a little bit of that in the inning where he gave up the homer to Diaz and to Cabbage. And so I had no problem with it at all, Andy. It's a little bit maybe jarring if you're just watching the box score and you say, 62 pitches. You know, that's not typically when you're pulling a guy. But I just don't think you have any reason to tempt it. What happens if he gets into some trouble and now you're asking a bullpen that, all right, if we want to talk about the bullpen being taxed, it has been. But by the same token, I don't think any of JoJo, Kittredge, or Helsley are necessarily like in the top 10 in MLB in pitches thrown this year among relievers. Like, I think, yes, they've been taxed because you're always wary of not turning them into mush in July, August, and September. But those guys were off yesterday, right? So they had a chance, and Helsley's been off for several days in a row, had a chance to, with a 2-run lead, run their script. That's the blueprint. And I don't have a problem with them doing that, Andy, because this game was important. You can't get swept by the Astros. I understand you lost the last 2 series, but to be able to salvage games in each and just kind of, all right, we're at that status quo. It's not all terrible, and then we're playing the Rockies and Pirates this week. That was one that Ollie Marmol showed the aggressiveness as a manager to make sure you lock down. People would have been losing their minds if he had given up a base hit or walk somebody, and then suddenly a home run, and you have a tie game, and you have a completely different pitching plan in the 7th, 8th, and 9th. I am okay with them going out and making sure they lock that game down, regardless of Michaelis's pitch count. He did his job. That's really the way I look at it. I think it's just a funky look on the box score when you see it, but I don't think there's any real issue with it if you kind of recognize the way that game was flowing for Michaelis. Again, he gave up bombs to those two players. Familiarity was the word that Ollie Marmol used. I think that's the right word to use. They kind of knew his game at this point in the third time through the order. There's no reason to chance it.
And I think that within this game, he managed it the way that he should have. I mean, again, you have essentially it's not a guaranteed, but it gives you the best chance of locking down that game when you only are up by a couple of runs. Were they up by 2 by the time the 7th came around, or did the home run by Arenado come a little later? Actually, no. I think it was before the 7th inning. So, I mean, they still a very slim lead. Either way, you have to turn to your leverage guys to make sure that's the case. And if you are out there saying, well, you're using the leverage guys a little too much, is that on the managerial staff, or is that on the offense not giving big enough leads to make sure that you're not using those guys enough?
It's what we talked about yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you got to win these games by more if you don't want those guys to be used so much.
Eventually, right? It doesn't have to be every day, but you've got to be able to mix in those days where you win and can throw Kyle Leahy for 2 innings to wrap up a game after your starter goes 7. Like that's the kind of game they haven't had too much of this year. And I don't know that many of them are in the offing just because it's not the way the Cardinals, I think, are built. Because even though they get a good start from Michaelis, and we're touting the quality starts that he's been pitching, he still makes a mistake or two every single game. He is going to give up at least a solo home run every single time he pitches, and it's going to be on an off-speed pitch that finds too much of the plate and gets punished thusly. So with that understanding, you don't have a pitching staff that necessarily, when they do go 6 or 7, is allowing no runs. Outside of maybe Sonny Gray, you've got guys that are going to get tagged here and there, and that puts it a little bit more on the offense that suddenly 5-0, 4-0, those types of scores, you don't really see that often. It's going to have to be 6-2, 7-2 for the Cardinals to really have that type of lead, because you know that with this starting pitching staff, and you know, we can get into Palante yesterday, back on the table is this question of a number 5 starter after his outing. You know that the offense is going to have to go that extra mile, and they've not really been able to get to it at this point in the season. So, yeah, I think that has a downstream effect on what the back-end relief situation looks like for the Cardinals. And, look, the best teams are using their back-end guys a lot because they're winning a lot of games. So it's not that I know we want to be aware of it because everybody's afraid of the bottom falling out on that group, and then later on in the year they're not effective. But it's okay. Like, the top guys on your bullpen should be pitching pretty frequently, and I think Ollie Marmol and his staff have done a good job of toggling it back on the days that they're not available. But on the days that they are available and the situation demands it, I think you put him out there and it's totally fine. Now, could they have chanced it with Michaelis and gotten one more inning out of him and maybe saved one of those guys in the back 3? Yeah, you might have been able to do that. Maybe you go Kittredge, Helsley, if Michaelis pitches the 7th. But I just think with lefties coming up in the lineup in a situation where Michaelis had made a couple of mistakes more recently in the game, he was efficient because he was pitching to contact with frequency. But even the Yordan Alvarez, that was later. But there were guys that would hit balls deeper, and they would find a glove or plays on the infield that would be made. So I'm really satisfied in that moment. I was kind of wondering myself, going, all right, 62 pitches, but all 3 of them are available. The 3 relievers that you really trust were available, and this is an example of Ollie Marmol managing it a little bit more aggressively, like it's a playoff game. There are quote-unquote must-win games throughout a season if you're sort of measuring the vibes of a team and the trajectory of a team. This was one where you say, let's use our best, because when we play the Rockies over the next 4, there might be a game or 2 where we score 7 or 8, the way that this lineup is starting to come together, and maybe we don't need Ryan Helsley and JoJo Romero and Andrew Kittredge to pitch 3 times in that series to win the series. I think that's the way it was managed today. The Astros got to the Cardinals twice. Ollie Marmol said, I'm not letting them get to us again, and then potentially hamstringing my bullpen even further. If Michaelis gives up a couple of base runners and they're saying, oh, JoJo, we need you to rescue this situation, now it's higher leverage, it's more intensity on those arms, instead of giving them the clean inning and saying, we're going to probably win this game if we line up our back end like we were able to do. I thought it was good managing, personally.
For this game, yes, for sure. But
you're wondering long term if it's a mistake. Is that what you're saying? Like if there's going to be an effect on the weekend?
Not on the weekend, I don't think. But, I mean, when it comes to the fact that, again, enough times, it's not necessarily Ollie Marmol's fault, but it's just, it is his problem, I would say, that the offense isn't necessarily getting enough support for these pitchers when they go out there and try to protect leads. And so giving them more of a chance to protect those leads should be their goal this weekend, again, against the Rockies team that is not going to be so daunting in most situations. I think Ollie Marmol is almost forced to be in this situation himself to say, like, look, again, if we lose this, we've lost 5 of our last 6 games after winning 12 of 15. And yeah, those 2 weeks felt great, but it all goes to waste almost if we dig ourselves out of that hole and then we fall back into it, even the slightest bit, because the calendar keeps moving. Like, you don't have enough time to dispel all these bad vibes in one fell swoop. You have to make sure that you're staying even keel and that you're not losing so much ground to the guys that are around you in the standings. And so, yeah, I can understand why this game here was one that the Cardinals needed to make sure, like, okay, it's getaway day. We know that. We know that they're a little banged up. They probably won't have some of their top guys in the lineup. Let's try and make sure if Michaelis does well and gets us through 6 and we have a lead, that we don't relinquish it, or at least we give ourselves the best chance of getting through a game like that. And look, the fact that Ollie Marmol has to use those guys in those situations in that type of game, even though they have a whole lot of days to have to play games throughout this weekend, this month, I don't think it's necessarily on him. I think it's necessarily on the fact that the offense hasn't provided what they're supposed to, that the front office is not necessarily providing what they're supposed to. Some of it's bad luck. They've had some injuries that they can't do anything about. They just have to wait on that. But in the end, you're right, Brenden. In the micro, you have to worry about the here and now, and that's ultimately what Ollie Marmol in that game had to make sure he did. He can't think about, how JoJo Romero is going to feel in mid-August based off of whether or not he uses him right now. He can worry about that later and try to map it out a little bit more after this game. But I think for now he needed to use him.
In the aspect that I think we make too much of the overusing relievers, we talk about it more than is proportional, maybe, because if you are to look and say, all right, pitches thrown by relievers this season in Major League Baseball, would it surprise you to learn that the Cardinals don't have a reliever in the top 30 in pitches thrown? They don't have one. Romero has been tasked with the most, throwing the 33rd most pitches among MLB relievers. Ryan Fernandez comes in at 49th in baseball, but like if you think about it, statistically, you should have one guy between 1 and 30, another guy between 30 and 60. Like, that would mean you're kind of balancing it out and being at a reasonable rate. Andrew Kittredge is 99th in pitches thrown among relievers. Ryan Helsley is not listed among the top 100. So they're not burning out these guys. Their job is to be Major League Baseball pitchers and to be high leverage relievers. That's their job. So when none of the 3 of them were asked to pitch yesterday, this is the way it works. You pitch today, and the situation demanded it, and Miles Michaelis is not guaranteed or statistically as likely to get through that 7th unscathed as JoJo Romero was, and then it lines up Kittredge really nicely when there's righties coming up in the 8th. Like, the situation was screaming for what Ollie Marmol did. I think if you're just managing to the stat sheet of, well, how many pitches has he thrown? Only 62. We can go deeper. If they're up 5-2, Andy, I bet Michaelis maybe pitches the 7th. 6-2, he definitely does. But it's a 2-run game, and we've seen him get tagged by homers against 2 of the guys that were coming up in that inning. I don't think it's just the micro. I think it's a recognition of the macro that, for as much as we do talk about it, it is important to keep relievers fresh. Ollie Marmol's kind of been able to do that. They don't have any relievers that have been worked to the bone where, they should be burning out. Relievers will burn out. That's going to happen, and it's not really something you can help sometimes. But all in all, like, when you look at the data on it, they're not throwing any more than the leverage relievers from other MLB teams. And if this is a contending team, those 3 are going to have to throw 65, 70 games and do their jobs when the situation demands of it. they were able to shorten today's game by Michaelis doing his job and by the back three being about as automatic as they come in baseball. And now you do. You have a 4-game series over the weekend, but I think it lines up strategically. Like, these are the things that managerially you have to think about, and the coaching staff has to think about. The Rockies should be a pitching staff that you can tag a little easier. So rather than being locked into a bunch of 4-2 games this weekend, I think there's a chance the Cardinals can get 5 or 6 or 7 runs in a number of those games. And the next time if a pitcher is that efficient through 6 and the Cardinals are up 6-2, I think that guy probably throws the 7th, depending on who it is. If it's a Sonny Gray, certainly. If it's a Lance Lynn, certainly. Kyle Gibson, of course. Michaelis, look, he did his job, and they had the exact setup that they wanted to ensure you didn't fall way back. Because what happens if they blow that game? We're talking about a team in disarray, lost 5 of 6. Yep. Instead, we're going, all right, a little bit less than average road trip, but you're alive. And you're playing the Rockies tomorrow.
I think it's, you hold serve almost. I don't know if this is as hold serve as the last series was. Like, you would have liked to maybe win, either Monday or Tuesday against a team like this. But, I mean, still, it could have been worse. You're able to have good vibes traveling back home and then face a team that you can certainly pile up runs against. Or
and they need to.
Be able to. You need to.
They need to stomp the Rockies, right? 3 or 4 has to be the minimum, and we'll obviously talk more about the series. But you have to. And now you're set up to maybe be able to do it, too.
875 KTGR.
I liked it.
If you want to call or text us here on the show to talk about the Cardinals getting the win against the Astros today, avoiding the sweep as they improved to 2 games under 500. The Royals, oh, man, come on. This game that they had against the Guardians, where they started up 5-0, and then it all came crashing down. First of all, I mean, yes, we'll get to Bobby Witt in a second. But, I mean, the Guardians ended up getting to Seth Lugo a little bit later in the game. He started off very well. He had like 3 clean innings and then had a bit of a blow-up in the 4th. And then later on in the 7th, they let him pitch the 7th, first of all, with, the 2-run lead. And then...
maybe if they had a triumvirate, they wouldn't have had to do that.
Exactly. I mean, that's an important first game of the series. You want to win Seth Lugo's start against that team on the road to start off that series, and they couldn't get it done. But, I mean, that in and of itself, it's not necessarily the bullpen's fault either because, I mean, look, Lugo pitched the 7th, gave up the 2-run homer. That was the tie game, and then he didn't record an out there in the 7th. It looked like they were going to get out of it, though. With Long coming in, he got a base runner on, but then recorded a couple of outs. Maybe the thing you have an issue with is that he walked a couple more guys to load the bases with 2 outs, but then he got the ground ball in order to get out of the inning. But Bobby Witt, explain to me what you think his thought process was. Like, he takes the ball.
He thought he could get the force out at second. I mean,
but then at the very last minute, he changes his mind and tries to throw to first.
Yeah, because he wasn't going to get the force out at second. He realized he was not beating that runner to the bag. Man. I mean, it was pretty clear he was not going to get there. Gosh. So he should have just gone to the... look, if you can run to a bag, take a few steps, and record a forced out rather than have to make a throw, fewer variables involved, right? But he misjudged it was a physics problem, and he lost because he thought he was going to be able to get to that bag quicker than he was. And then at the last second, he said, well, my only chance now that I screwed up the first, like, it should probably be, can it be 2 errors on one play? Because I think it's
just 2 mental errors for sure.
Boneheaded error to try to think you're going to beat the runner to second. And then once you realize you can't, he sails the throw. I mean, that was rough. That was rough, and it did, cost them a legit chance to win the game because it's a 3-run error and it's 8-5 instead of a tie game, I guess, at that point.
Yeah, I mean, no guarantees as to what was going to happen after that, but at least you're in the game. At least you're still tied with that team, and you can go, pound for pound with the bullpen. But yeah, Bobby Witt is an excellent player. We shouldn't have to critique too much of his game, but I think that was a learning experience. Like, with years, he will learn to just say, look, I've got the ground ball. I'm going to set my feet and I'm going to throw to first. I'm not going to try and be a hero and go to second and think that that's the easier play. The default decision in that spot with bases loaded and the runners essentially going right on the crack of the bat is grab the ball, set your feet, throw to first.
And the thing is, even if sometimes you just have to just cut your losses and maybe don't throw that ball away.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Just say, you know what? I have gotten myself into a pickle here to where I might not beat this runner to second, but I'm going to stretch and try my best to beat him, and then replay will show whether I did or not. Because it would have been close. I just don't think he would have gotten there. But it's throwing the ball away that really tanks the whole thing, because it turns into 3 runs instead of just what would have been 1, and still a chance to get out of the inning with a close game at that point. So maybe that's the other mistake is, yeah, you recognize you probably misjudged what was going to happen there at the bag, but it's throwing the ball and trying to be a hero after. It's chasing a bad mistake with another one, and that's human nature, because you think, especially an athletic guy like him, we've seen Mason Wynn do this kind of thing. You maybe not this bad, but like the idea that I can make up for any situation with my athleticism, and Bobby Witt kind of got the hubris in that moment to think that he could, and just was in no position to throw that ball, and it cost the Royals for sure.
And we'll see if they can bounce back from that, but that's a rough way to lose the first game of what's a pretty important series for the Royals to try and keep this stretch run up of how they've been able to catapult themselves into the playoff conversation. And can they get back on track here with Brady Singer on the mound? I mean, Singer, I think, could have a solid game today, but I mean, Cleveland's going to have another good starter themselves.
That game was rained out. It will be rescheduled for August 26th.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Man, they got to wait till August 26th to play? That's going to be a long way off.
My gosh,
that bullpen will be fresh, though.
I tell you what, it better be. They can just take a whole vacation and just, come on back, stay fresh, and, come back at it. But, looks like postponement for Royals and Guardians today, but they will not make it up tomorrow. They will not play a doubleheader tomorrow. They'll instead make that up later on in the season on August 26th.
I think it's the next time that the Royals are in Cleveland, or they just picked a day where it's like...
that's when it is.
All right, nobody's anywhere, so you might
tomorrow they'll play with a 12-10 first pitch to close out the series. And look, I mean, with the way that it was starting out, I don't think that's all too bad for the Royals, don't you think? I mean, they can shake that loss off a little bit more, and if they win tomorrow's game, but okay, you're just back where you started, which isn't the worst thing in the world for how that series could have turned out based on the bottom falling out in the later innings yesterday. I think that helps the Royals, honestly.
Penciling it.
Well, it doesn't help them, though.
Tomorrow.
It doesn't necessarily help them if they go play them in August. You have an extra game in August, and the rotation is banged up, or they have. I think injuries will determine that, because starting pitching, for the most part, is going to be the thing that has to carry the Royals. And I like their group, but if it's a group that looks a little different in August, you might be going, oh man, they would have had a better pitching matchup back in June. But yeah, the vibes of the way they lost last night, not what you want. So another day to think about it, though, is the other angle to that, where they'd rather maybe just get back out there and play, but they'll have to wait till tomorrow afternoon to do that.